Gavin Coombs getting a huge amount of credit coming out of the game. Didn't get the Man of the Match award, I think, much to the bemusement of most people who were watching the game. Interesting comments from Graham Rowntree after the game. He scored 2 tries, 23 tackles, 16 carries, 3 turnovers. Spoke about the development of his footballing intelligence and also not being included in the Ireland main squad for the November internationals. Gave him a bit of a kick up the backside. I saw over the weekend as well, maybe Fiona, some question marks about his general fitness at times, and that seems to improve massively as well. Peaking at exactly the right time now, it feels, Gavin Coombs. How impressed were you at the weekend?
Yeah, he was immense. I think he's after that drop, and I think, we saw a lot of guys took a lot of stick after that Ireland A game against the All Blacks, and he was certainly one of the players who's really stood up and put his hand up and went back and obviously worked in a lot of areas. I really enjoyed watching him in the last few games. He's trying to get to every breakdown. He seems to be everywhere, but he's such a clever rugby player as well. We're seeing his offloading game has come on loads, and obviously we know defensively with those 23 tackles, he was just immense. And losing Jack O'Donoghue, he might have kind of faded in the second half, but I just think it was the way the game was going, and one of the huge things was right at the button, getting in there, your body's tired, 81st minute, and he gets in, 80 minutes in, and he holds up that from the kickoff, and he holds up the team, Northampton team, to make it a turnover and essentially the ending of the game. So you can't question fitness when a guy gets up and is able to do that. So he's gone back to the drawing board. He's seen they like Doris, they like his style. Coombs has a different type of playing style. But obviously, at the start of the season, we weren't seeing enough of that. And I think he's shown, and he's definitely putting his hand up for a selection coming into this next Six Nations.
I don't think there's any real questions about the red card for Jack O'Donoghue for that tackle on David Ribbons. It did change the run of the game completely, because Munster were in total control and they'd won the game at that stage, and then they had to almost go and win it again in the final 20 minutes, and a different type of winning it that maybe they wouldn't have had earlier in the season. Just able to grind it out. Really interesting substitutions from Graham Rowntree, taking off some of his most experienced players and really putting a trust in youth, and some very interesting comments from him after the game about that actually they need to reward form. They need to reward youth above experience. And for a team in transition, and for a Munster support who really want to get behind this team, actually they're the right comments, that people are going to get behind that and support that and be patient with them.
I think that's bravery that will be recognised by fans and rewarded with more patience, because look, Munster may lose in Toulouse at the weekend. They may end up having a really difficult away game in the last 16, and it might not take them any further. But by doing what he did in terms of leaving out Conor Murray and Keith Earls to start with, then taking off Carberry before he took off, leaving Crowley out there to close out the game, he and Mike Prendergast and Dennis Leamy are showing incredible faith in the young players that the Munster fans have had for a while, but they're now being shown almost that these guys are ready, and that they've been ready for a while, and that Van Gran was much more conservative and wouldn't trust them. He would always think that the experienced guy would get them to the line. Rowntree is saying, no, this is my team now. This, just because you've done it 3 years ago or 5 years ago, over the course of the next decade, what I need is the player who's playing well now, and I'm going to back him. And can you imagine the message that sends to a Jack Crowley or any of the other players who's being backed in that way? We had the rare opportunity to watch Munster's training last Tuesday, and they had 3 backlines running, and we were sworn to secrecy on it at the time, but we could see that Murray wasn't involved. But the backline he was part of was him, Ben Healy, Rory Scannell, Ireland International, Malachi Fekitoa, All Black, Sebo was on one wing, Pa Campbell, who's the next big thing, a fullback, was a fullback, and I can't remember who the right winger was, but it was a backline that you could field in a Heineken Cup game and not really bat an eyelid. They've got a bit of depth there now, and now what we want to see is, what does this do to Conor Murray and Keith Earls, and what does it do to Fekitoa, because they don't want to be left out. Their Ireland places are at risk. I mean, Fekitoa's got a World Cup this year, so it should bring out a big response in the older guys. Carberry's now, he's being undermined at provincial level, which will have a knock-on effect for his Ireland stuff. So we want to see that. Now we want to see those guys react, and that should bring out the best. That should result in better things for Munster and for Ireland and for Rowntree and for the Munster fans as well.
There's a lot in that there, Fiona, what Rory's talking about. On Joey Carberry, I heard Alan Quinlan this morning talking about, if you're being critical of Munster, there was a lack of game management at times. And the fact that Carberry's taken off for 20 minutes after a bit of a mistake as they get in to really close the gap. Carberry, in terms of actually grabbing that jersey at Munster, never mind at Ireland, in those sort of games, it just doesn't seem to be getting to that next level with him at the moment.
No, he doesn't seem to be kicking on, and it's kind of, as you said earlier, crunch time. It's crunch time coming into Six Nations. We'll see kind of a clearer path on selection, I think, when it's coming into the World Cup. So these guys need to be putting in massive performances. I thought he handled the first half really well. I thought he controlled it. I thought the two guys outside him, you know, he's trying to build up a partnership with Crowley. So you have to remember there's been a few changes in there as well, and I thought he controlled that. But obviously after the red card, he probably wasn't using his forwards as much as he would have liked to. You know, he was trying to take the pressure off them a little bit, and we saw him taking off. But I also think it's kind of from Rowntree, it's having faith in Crowley to put his hand up and step up and let him in there and get Scannell on in the centre, who he knows does a job, you know, from the bench, whether starting. We know what Scannell can bring, but it's showing now that these guys are capable of in the high pressure, intense moments, being able to come on. And Crowley took reins, and you know, he obviously scored that penalty as well, which was a pressure situation. So I think although Carberry, you know, I thought he controlled the game at times in the first half, maybe let a few things slip in the second half. There's definitely a lot of pressure coming on as well from that Ross Byrne side of things, because he's starting to come into form, and we know exactly what he can do from the boot as well.
There were quite a few articles about that open training session you were led into, and what was the line? Was it chaos games, the way they described the training session, and the intensity that they're trying to bring to those sessions and make them as game-like as possible? There was a real intensity in that first 20 minutes from Munster, and you know, some of the players that are starting to stand out. Shane Daly was on the show a few months back, and he was really interested in talking about, you know, a young guy like him and the challenge that he was now facing coming in under Graham Rowntree compared to Johan van Graan, that like him playing in the back three, like it was basically a kick chase game. So that's his first experience of senior rugby, of Munster rugby, is that this is what's expected. And now he's getting the ball in hand, and actually having that at training every day is going to take him a little bit of time to get up to that sort of speed, that sort of chaos that will come in these sort of games. Did we see from him at the weekend actually that those younger guys are fully starting to understand the demands of playing at this level on a consistent basis?
But I think they have ownership as well. It's their team now. That we talked to Calvin Nash before November. He didn't play in November for Ireland, but he was in part of the squad, and he was talking about how he always knew, no matter how well he played when he was given a chance by Van Graan, that he was going to be gone the week later because the lads are back. Whereas now it's their team. Like Shane Daly's making big defensive plays at pivotal moments. And look, I'm not saying he wouldn't have done it anyway, but now he knows he's probably going to play again next week. This is his journey. Like, you know, he is not going to be cast aside for someone coming back from Ireland camp next week. If Munster go all the way in the Heineken Cup, he's going to be on the wing as long as he keeps playing well, and he knows that. I think the pace of training and the pace of play is going to stand to these players when it comes to international selection. We see what Leinster are doing. They're playing incredible rugby at incredible speed, and for all that Gavin Coombs is playing well, Caelan Doris is on another level altogether. But for Coombs to close that gap, he needs to be doing this on a daily basis. And I think the Munster players, if they're training this way every day and they're playing this way on weekends, and their attack is starting to click, they were definitely moving ahead of their rivals in Ulster and Connacht, and they're closing the gap on the Leinster players, albeit the Leinster players are still accelerating at a fairly decent lick. But it's definitely going to do them like Daly, I think, will be in the Ireland squad. I think he's playing very well. Nash got a lot of admirers in the Ireland squad. I think the way he trained in November is going really well. So these players, like Casey, starting ahead of Murray at Munster, he's got to be in the frame now to be reserve for number 21 over in Cardiff in a couple of weeks' time, because he's starting for Munster. Coombs, I think, is going to be back in the Ireland squad, having been ditched during November because he's playing so well. He's got another job to do to try and get ahead of Ryan Bird, Caelan Doris, even Peter O'Mahony, but still he's in the frame again. So the way they're training, the way they're playing is definitely enhancing their chances of playing for Ireland.
So if you want to hear the full Monday Night Rugby, the only way to listen back in full is by subscribing to the podcast. Get on to OTB Rugby and you can listen back to the full conversation with Fiona Hayes and Rory O'Connor there. Just click subscribe, or you can go straight to the link right here.